Okay, here we are back in the lab again, and today we're going to insert the diagnostic denture, or the provisional denture, and this patient's lower is going to be an immediate denture. And so the major change that we've made to the branching technique, and the one that I think impacts the whole technique the most, is the closed system. So here's what you're going to get back from the lab. Instead of those stone casts, which was an open system, what you're going to get back is a lined flask, duplicating flask, and a denture that has been relieved. The intaglia of the denture has been relieved 1 to 3 millimeters, and the borders have been dropped down about 1 to 3 millimeters. But you'd like to get 3 across the board. But this patient has combination syndrome, so in the anterior, she has almost no vestibule. We're going to need the flange to get the flow cast up into her vestibule. We've done a wax try-in. Charlie has fabricated the denture, oval base, but prior to making the flask, he's taken it off the stone, he's remounted it and ground it in. Then he puts it in the flask, then he relieves it. So now I have a space for flow cap.
Here I am mixing our putty that we're going to load into the first half of the flask. We use matrix 70 from Annextent, make it flush with the rim, tooth side down, and then press against the border to make sure we have intimate contact. Try the other side by closing the flask, and it gives you a little cut. After it's set, you apply Vaseline so that the two halves do not stick to each other. It's just a little bit of a releasing agent. I'm going to start my mix of putty again. I do a 3 to 3 mix, 3 scoops of white, 3 scoops of orange. Mixing it up to a homogenized mixture, looking for light orange. What I'm then going to do is pull the piece apart, load the first half into the flask, and then I take the second part and I rope it and load it into the intaglia surface of the denture. I grab a clamp, close the flask, apply the clamp, and then set the screw. I now remove all the excess and allow it to set. I'm now opening the flask and removing any flashing or excess. Little tag ends on the underside will hold the putty archive up if you then try to load it back into the flask. So I remove all those just to ensure we get a good fit back when we put it back in, just like that. Just using a buffalo knife, a lab knife, I remove the denture. You can at this point cut back any maybe suspect areas around the border. I'm now drawing 3 millimeters down from the border on the denture, and this is going to give me my pattern for relief vertically. After I go all the way around the denture, I will also use a depth cut in the palate with a large fluted carbide burr. Here I am making the depth cuts, really going down the middle of the palate there. I'll apply some Sharpie. I'm going to do that with the burr, relieving all excess undercuts and material down to the depth of about 2 to 3 millimeters. So removing quite a bit of material, and this is going to allow us to have a nice room for the flow cast that we're going to process in later. So I start with the axial walls of the palate, then I go down into all the undercuts. I do this, what I would call palatal relief first, before I do the relief vertically of the borders. I find it ensures that you don't take too much of the border off vertically. I'm not relieving as much towards the posterior part of the prosthetic. I want to leave a little bit more material to ensure we have a good post-palatal seal. Here I am now removing down vertically the borders 3 millimeters to the dotted line I drew with the measurements off the TrueBite ruler. After I remove the borders vertically, I'll then go back in to the palatal side of the denture and do another horizontal reduction, or cutting back any sharp angles that you get from the vertical cut. Here you can see the denture against the light.
So, she's in the room. We're going to go ahead and put our flow cast. A couple of things I want you to take note of. We have a little thermometer in our water. We want it 100 to 110 degrees. Any hotter than that, flow cast is going to set too fast. Any cooler than that, it's going to take all morning to set. So the term we use is lukewarm water. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to apply some Vaseline to the outside, just so I can get the flow cast off if it gets on there. Then I'm going to put the denture down into the flask, if I can get it in there. There we go. And so now the relieved denture is in the flask, and I'm going to then put Vaseline all on the putty. The putty that we use is made by ANXDent. It's Matrix 70. We quit using Siltec putty because you can't buy it in. You can't buy the accelerator separately from it. You have to buy a whole kit every time. So we moved on to another company. So now my flask is ready to put the flow cast, which is going to give me the new basal seat and the borders. And so our measurements are 1 liquid, right, to 1.5 powder. Now, we got some feedback from some of our flowcast users, and they would like some graduations on the cylinders. And so our next ordering of the cylinders, we're going to put some way for you'll know what a half is. Okay, of course we use a monojet syringe. Put the flow cast in the monojet syringe. We've set a timer, 3 to 5 minutes. It'll be workable. Woohoo! And so we'll put it in the lukewarm water, and in 3 to 5 minutes, and we count up instead of counting down. And the reason we do that with our little timer is if we want to add some borders with excess, we can know how long it has been going since the time we mixed it. A lot of times what we'll do is when I put it into the flask, Kathy will mix another mix, but not put it in the water. Put it in the room, and that way if I want to add spot in where some bubbles are or add a little border here or there, I have a second mix ready to go in the room, but it hasn't been accelerated by the warm water, which gives me more working time and the ability to add. If I do want to accelerate it, say I want to put a rotamalahyoid fossa border on and I need some stiffness to it, I can always immerse it in a little bit of water and speed it up so that I can use it quicker. I think what the people that used Hydrocast over the years are going to realize Flowcast is not exactly the same in terms of working time, and the whole process goes a little bit faster with Flowcast, which frankly I like. You're not going to keep people in Flowcast for 3 or 4 or 5 months. You'll be able to finalize a little bit quicker with Flowcast than you ever could with Hydrocast. The questions that we have: can you still use Flowcast on the stone cast? Yes, but you miss the opportunity to develop borders, because with the old stone cast, it all just runs out. You don't end up with any borders at all. And I think what you'll notice is with this, you're going to start to see borders develop from the very beginning, which to me is critically important for a really good impression. Now, anybody that's worked with me knows that I like to take a little bit, put it on my hand so I can see it's starting to get just about there. We're at 3 minutes right now. And so it's kind of like honey. Oh, honey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inject it into the border areas and some in the palate, and then I'm just going to inject the remainder in the denture. I can take my spatula and smooth it around. Look at that consistency there. And what you'll notice is Flowcast is still warm, so it's still accelerating. I want to close this down. Here's one of our tricks, is we use these little quick grips to close that line flask down to where we can pick up the little locking mechanism. I'll give it one more squeeze, one more turn. We can take that off. Go to your local Ace Hardware and get you some of these. Cut the stick off because the stick's about this long. Now what I can do is I can put this in some warm water, just in the sink. Our timer is still going. We're at 4 minutes and 20 seconds. And so we haven't even hit the 5-minute mark. So in my sink back here, I'm going to go ahead and let that set to the point where I can pull it out and then put it into Miss Wilcox's mouth. So let's give that a little time. We're going to be at about 7 minutes when we do that. About 7 minutes is when we're going to pull that out. Okay? Okay, it's been about 7, really 8 minutes since we've been filming. It's been in warm water. Use a little bit hotter water with it in the duplicating flask because it can't flow, it can't go anywhere. And so what I'm going to do is see, I've got this on my hand, and you can see I'm monitoring the consistency. And for all you fellows and girls that were using Hydrocast, that's pretty daggum close to the consistency of Hydrocast right there. When I open this up, sometimes it'll string just a little bit. Oh yeah. A little bit of excess there. But what you can see is where Charlie relieved, I've got pretty good borders. I've got a nice amount in the palate. But back in the back, where the post-palatal seal would be, we don't have quite as much, which I like because I want that to form a little post-palatal seal. I could put it on if I want to, but trimming this is nothing more than pulling it off. I can take my fingers and put those borders, play with them, get them nice looking. I can even do this. I can close it back. So we can now pop this out of the flask. I like to go into the posterior so I don't scar up my borders up front. And as you can see now, you never get borders like this coming out of the stone jigs. So I can take my HydroCast cutter, I can trim that back just a little bit in these areas where I've got a little excess. But you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take it to her mouth just like this. And I'm gonna see if that will just blend over and give me a little excess to work with. So, Kathy has mixed a second mix. It's probably been running about 5 minutes, so it's still, but it hasn't been in warm water, so it's still very runny. So we'll take this to the operatory with us along with the HydroCast cutter. So let's go run in there. Okay, so we've got our flow casted provisional denture on the upper. We've done a wax try-in, which she and her husband approved, and her tissue in the anterior maxilla has really been abused by the lower anterior teeth pounding against it, which is classic combination syndrome. So what I've done is I scooped out a little bit of flow cast with my hot knife, and then I put some real thin wash layer, and it's that second mix that Kathy made. And so if I put some out on my thumb, you'll see it's really loose. But I want that so her tissue can kind of rebound into that area. The other thing I'm going to do is I got a little void right here. I'm going to fill that in. Okay? And so now we're going to go ahead and try this in. And one of the things that I do, we don't really have a lower to put in there yet, so they don't have anything to bite against, right? So I'm going to get you to close on my fingers. Go ahead and squeeze on them. You can't hurt me. If you do, I'll scream. Now this is a patient that has absolutely no ridge. She's got some tuberosities, but nothing else. And it's in there pretty solid. It's going to take a few minutes for that fresh flow cast that I put in there to set a little bit. But we're really just kind of sitting on a very loose base. And so if I take this out, can't get it out. That's a trick. Everybody knows to take the denture out, you pop it down in the back. And as you can see, it has started to mold here in the front, and there's just not much vestibule up front at all. However, we've started to develop some really nice borders around here. And so I'm going to pop this back in. And we're just going to let that sit in there while we get those lower teeth out, and then I'll show you how to put the flow cast into an immediate. Okay. Now something I want you to share with your lab technician is that Charlie processed the provisional denture on a cast from the alginate impression, and there was no block out, none. So that when he deflasked it from the IVA base, he destroyed the model. But the denture itself had a replica of that stone cast, and that's what the putty is. That he puts it into the Lang duplicating flask, then he relieves it 1 to 3 millimeters in the intagula and the borders, so that when I open this, now this is the immediate denture we talked about on her lower. I've taken the teeth out, and we're going to go put this in as a healing denture. When I pull this open, now I have borders I can even take my fingers and kind of push them around to get them to go where I want. And then where the anterior is, I taught Charlie how to trim the teeth off of the stone cast using Kelly's rule of thirds to provide us basically with a bucket over the extraction sites. Kathy has mixed another mix of flow cast that when we go to her mouth, I can just put a little bit in there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time adjusting this because it is an immediate denture. She's coming back tomorrow for her 24-hour adjustment. So I don't do a lot of adjustment today. Let her get on home, put a little ice on, take a little bit of Motrin, and just be comfortable this afternoon while Flowcast is doing its job. So let's run into the operatory, and I'm going to place this in her mouth. We've come out of the flask with a flow-casted, I like to call this a healing denture, because that's really all it's going to do for us for the first 24 hours. This is just something to give her to serve as a bandage or a cast or a dressing, whatever term you want to use. And the flow cast, because it's soft, will be very comfortable. So we're going to try this in. We have bite blocks in the posterior, which we'll be able to adjust, but I probably won't do much until tomorrow. Bite together for me now. I'm gonna have you stay just like that. Squeeze for me a little bit. When I added to the front, it kicked it up. So we're going to let her sit with that in her mouth. We're going to let the flow cast move for us. Open real wide. Stick your tongue out at me. Thank you. Do that one more time. Again. Now, put your tongue in the roof of your mouth and push real hard. That elevates the floor of the mouth and gets that mylohyoid muscle to start forming, hopefully, what would be an S curve on the lower. But you never really know until the next day. Bite together again. Open from now. Let's take a look at that upper. See how it's doing. I hear it coming. Come on out of here. Thank you. Kathy's going to hold that for me. Now here's our upper. And it's very interesting. Very, very interesting. I don't do a lot of adjustment this first day, but I can tell you there's two places I'm going to adjust. And I'm going to mark them with a pencil so that you can see exactly. So you can see exactly where I'm going to adjust. Look right here. That border is through the flow cast, but more importantly right here. And with combination syndrome patients, you just don't see much of a mediolabial frenum. And so I'm going to adjust this and this with an acrylic burr. This side's starting to look good. This is looking good. We're starting to develop a little malar bone projection and a little bit of frenum here. So I'm going to go grind that back, grind this back, and with this second mix, really the third mix that Kathy has made, we will spot those in, and then we'll look at the lower. Be right back. You might notice when I hold fresh flow cast in an upper, I hold palette like this. That way I can work borders and move it around. But I am going to leave myself a little flat spot right there where my thumb is. But that's a good working movement. I got pretty good consistency. I'm going to add that right there. I'm going to add back. By tomorrow, this one in the back would have absolutely been driving her crazy. It actually sounds like I know what I'm talking about. And frankly, I do, because I've been through this with so many patients over the last 40 years. While this is still a little bit soft, where my thumb dug in, here's a trick. If you want to move the flow cast around, this is liquid. The liquid from the flow cast, to keep it from sticking to my fingers. If I just put a little bit of liquid on my gloved finger, and then I can spread this around, and then I can almost do this like a border mold you would if you're using like compound. Okay. Bite together for me now. Open. Now close. Come forward a little bit and close. There we go. Okay. Open for me now. Let's take a look at this lower. I'm gonna rinse it off. And as you can see, we're starting to develop a little S-curve here, a little S-curve here. We filled in nicely. This is an area I'm gonna need to adjust probably tomorrow. But I may as well go ahead and do it right now. My goal would be for her to be comfortable tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust that little flange is sticking out right there. Be right back. Here's a trick when you're adjusting Flowcast. Put a little liquid soap on it. So when you grind it and you get all the little hairs, it washes right off and it doesn't stick into the Flowcast. Tomorrow she would have told me, "Oh, Dr. Jimmy, this thing's cutting my throat." So now all these little hairs aren't going to stick to the Flowcast. They're going to stick to the liquid soap. And that's a trick right there. All the hydrocast here on the lingual. I'm just going to thin that down. That's Flowcast, by the way. Can't help myself. I'm going to thin that border down right here just a little bit. She has anesthesia in her tissue, so it's a little bit enlarged or swollen, if you will. So I'm not going to really be able to adjust that lingual with the anesthesia still in the tissue, which is a little different than a denture. It's the whole immediate thing. Let's add a little bit right back here where I adjusted, just to cover that flange a little bit. Just looking. Got a little place right there. A little fold, if you will. What's that lingual head hold? Here's another tip a lot of the participants in the courses have loved. When I go into the mouth with hydrocast or Flowcast everywhere, Kathy takes two mouth mirrors, and she holds it out so I can get that in there without getting it stuck all over everything. That's the trick. Bite down from it. And hold tightly. We're almost done for today. But our journey has just begun. Mm-hmm. You're gonna do great. You did great with the teeth coming out. Wow. You let them go. That's what it comes down to. You have to let them go. I'm trying to get a smile out of her, but she ain't smiling. Open from there. I want to see where I adjusted those two little spots. And you can see up here, she even pushed it out even more. But back here looks really good. Let's trim that up. if you're into this and you're gonna use this technique, buy a hot knife. I tried it for years without a hot knife, and it makes life so much easier to trim low cast. You can't do much else with it. But you can even take the hot knife, and if you got a little pull or something, you can just kind of, almost like a paintbrush, paint it down. Okay. Well, this board is looking good. Again, Kathy grabs the two mirrors. Helps me get it in there. Bite together some more. Open. Bite down again. Yeah. We got some work to do on the bite blocks, but we'll do that tomorrow when the